We are recording, thanks to a nice little Skype plugin.
Fantastic.
Alright, cool. So you know all about me. For the sake of the story, can you just go into a tiny bit of, like, give you a brief background to what you did before the MBA? And what you're doing now, and then we can go on to the idea that you're working on within the company that you work for.
Sure. So I work as an electrical engineer, consultant electrical engineer before my MBA. Worked with AECOM in Auckland and then moved with them to Brisbane. And when I was in Brisbane, they asked me to shift to Darwin to help set up their new office out there. And so I did that for a couple of years before I did my MBA. And so I did a couple of years of MBA in London with yourself and some other pretty good students, and that got my entrepreneurial bug going. After I finished my MBA, I tried to set up my own consulting practice in Darwin again, but that kind of didn't work as well because of the downturn in government spending. So I got a job in New Zealand as an asset manager for a local utility. And what we're trying to do out here is we're trying to create a real-time risk dashboard for the business.
Okay, before we go into that, you said you caught the entrepreneurial bug while you were at LBS, while you were doing your MBA. Can you go into that a bit more? Tell me, because you didn't. Did you go into an MBA thinking you might want to do entrepreneurship, or was it much more open-ended than that?
No, I didn't go into an MBA with any set plans. I guess being an engineer, I was pretty technical in my understanding of the world, and I never quite understood the gray areas of consumer behavior and how to think about opportunities, etc. For me, that was a right way of doing things or not.
Yeah.
Up at that point, and going to the MBA, kind of, you talk to people who've made like opportunities out of nothing, and you start, getting ideas, and you start bouncing ideas of people, and you're surrounded by people of a certain sort of positive disposition to life. I think an MBA has a lot of optimists in it who think there's opportunity everywhere they look, and that was quite a revealing thing for an engineer who's always pretty conservative.
That's a great point. That's a really interesting point. So you, although you didn't go in thinking about entrepreneurship, you started thinking about entrepreneurship on the MBA.
That's right.
I know, like, for example, me and you worked on the My Pint project, and that for me that was a big awakening. I had no idea that I was going to be interested in entrepreneurship.
Yeah, exactly. And those are the sort of opportunities that spark that interest, that as well as the entrepreneurship, like the core entrepreneurship course that we had. What was it called?
Understanding Entrepreneurial Management, I think.
That's right. That's the one.
With Jeff Skinner.
Yeah. With Jeff Skinner, that's right. So, it was opportunities like that, and just learning case studies, and reading about all these people who started, for example, telecommunication businesses in Africa, and they don't have any background in telecommunication. You wonder, how can you do that? But you really need to understand, the macro effects, and then you just surround yourself with the right people. So that's the mindset, that switch that you have. Previously, you look at doing everything yourself. Next thing after that, you look at where are the opportunities and who do I need to tap into to get stuff done.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So the telecommunications example was an LBS grad, right? Who didn't have a background in telecoms but managed to set up a telecoms company out there.
Yeah, I think it was an HBS grad. That was the Uganda telecommunications business. The first case study we did.
Oh yeah, okay. I think there was a few actually. There was also M-Pesa.
Okay, yeah, no, I didn't do that.
M-Pesa was the Kenyan mobile payments company.
Oh yes, there was. Yeah, that was an obvious one.
So you actually thought about setting up your own consultancy coming out of the MBA, that's quite an entrepreneurial move. Although you'd be setting up a sort of a business that's structured around, it has a blueprint and it has a structure, rather than a purely entrepreneurial venture, which is one type of entrepreneurship actually, just to go and set up, a business that is effectively, I don't know how you describe it. There are lots of consultancies, so there's a blueprint, and you can just go and effectively open up a consultancy shop.
It's a small business in its own right.
Yeah.
So I guess that's the difference between a small businessman and an entrepreneur. A small businessman, for example, a cafe is not really entrepreneurship. To me, that's a small business. It's quite a proven business model. Entrepreneurship, I think, requires a bit more imagination than just opening a cafe that's the same as any other cafe down the road. If you're offering something unique in your cafe, that then becomes entrepreneurship. And if you're,
do you think maybe it's a first small step, but do you think opening a consultancy in that case is an example of entrepreneurship?
Yeah,
I would say it is.
Yeah, it is, and I'll tell you why. Because what we were doing was I give a little bit of background. I came back to Australia, and one of my co-workers from my ACOM days was thinking of going out on his own, and so I got talking to him, and him and we set up shop together, and the reason why I think I would class this as entrepreneurship, because we didn't have any clients, and we didn't even really have any specific services that we sold. Our services was that the government in Darwin, they required significant local experience before they handed out any large projects to anyone. And so we did project management for external consultants, but that gave them a local presence in the office. So, for example, if there's a bridge being built, you need geotechnical engineers, you need civil engineers, you need structural engineers. So we would put together the tender package, and we would subcontract out a lot of the design work to external consultants who have a significant presence in other states, but not necessarily in the Northern Territory. And because we would be the local agents for that works, we would bear the risk on our insurance, but we would also manage the project locally for the government people. So that's how we set that up, and I don't think anyone's actually doing that right now.
Interesting. So, yeah, that's definitely entrepreneurial as an example of pulling together resources to make something happen, where otherwise it would be difficult to make it happen. So you did that for a bit, but then you said the economy, the broader context wasn't great at that point in time.
No. Yeah, so we managed to grow up to me, my colleague, and then we managed to get a full-time engineer and also get a 3-day a week. We had a graduate engineer as well. So we kind of did that for a while, but then work started drying up. There wasn't enough work coming in to sustain the workforce, so we had to kind of let go of a couple of people. And I kind of got this opportunity in New Zealand, so I took that and ran with it.
Okay, cool. So then that brings us to your entrepreneurial project. So you're currently working with a New Zealand utility, and you're looking to, you tell me about it, a bit more about it. It's basically trying to bring in an innovative technology or a platform of technologies into the utility sector.
Yeah, so what happens in New Zealand or in any utility is it's a regulated industry, and you need to justify how much you're spending to the government, because it's a utility by its nature is a monopoly, and so the amount of income you can generate is regulated. It's usually a percentage of how much infrastructure you have. But then what happens is that people are incentivized to invest a lot for a lot of infrastructure. So I could invest $100 million in infrastructure and then claim that my line charges has to go up and therefore I get more revenue. In order to prevent that, the government kind of says caps the amount that we can spend on infrastructure unless you can justify beyond what the government caps allow. So risk assessment is key in the industry, and you need to tell or communicate to the regulator why there might be additional risk to the consumer if you do not undertake certain infrastructure investment. So the whole idea is to be able to communicate, to talk about risk and align everybody in the organization to be talking about the risk of the investment that they're doing, and what risk mitigation, how to mitigate those risks in the most efficient way. In order to do that, we have to understand the condition of our asset, how likely it is to fail, when we need to replace it. And we're talking about stuff that's lasts 50 years. So we need to plan for 50 years at a time.
Okay, so just to paraphrase you in simpler language for the general audience, you're talking about power supply infrastructure, right? You manage that. Right. And there are components, the assets that you're talking about are the components of that infrastructure, pylons, cables, that kind of stuff.
That's right.
And that stuff breaks down and you have to fix it when it breaks down, correct?
That's right.
And you need to identify where the problem is or how old a component is so that you know when to fix it, or ideally before it breaks down, I guess.
Exactly. But it's not just a component. We're talking about $1 million transmission line that might have 60% of its poles that are old. Now, you could change one pole at a time, but ideally you just replace that whole transmission line towards the end of its life, because it's more effective to send people there once rather than keep sending somebody to change one pole at a time. Therefore, it'll be a significant capital investment over a short period, but that has long-term benefit.
Yeah, got it. Okay, so basically at the moment, tell me how the system works at the moment. How do you...
So at the moment, there's no... Only thing that we use age. Age is the only indication that we have. We know when we install something, and we say that after 30 years we will replace a transformer, or after 50 years we replace a pole. And that's the only way we can assess when we replace something.
Right.
But what we're working on is...
before we go into that, so basically you've got like a database of these assets, these components in the power infrastructure, of how old they are essentially, and then you basically go through that database and go, look, this thing's getting old, we need to maybe fix it or replace it.
That's right.
And then you have to send someone to go and check it, I guess.
Well, yes. So usually we don't have that luxury to be able to send people, because everything's spread across a huge geography.
Yep.
And you kind of have to package stuff, large bits of work. So there might be 100 poles that you change out a year, and you can't send somebody to check out each pole every time. And what this does is it assumes that the age is a perfect proxy for how much value or how much life is left in that pole, but it's actually not. Mm-hmm. A lot of times poles fail prematurely, or they actually last a lot longer than you expect, so you could actually use that pole for a lot longer. So cool. That's where the difficulty comes in this.
So you recognise an opportunity to do a little entrepreneurial project within the utility company to change that system and have what's it called? Is it a rapid response system? Used a phrase for it.
Yeah, so we're using
SAP or something.
An EAM, so an enterprise asset management system. So we're installing an enterprise asset management system, an EAM, which is not that new in itself.
Yeah. So before we don't dive into the details just yet, tell me exactly how that's going to work compared to the old system, just in lay terms.
Yeah. So an EAM. So in previously we had everything on a map, and we knew when it was installed.
Yeah.
But we didn't know how much work we did on it. There was no way of recording the history of what work was done on any asset. Now with an EAM, you can record the history, so you can actually get a cumulative amount of money that you spent on an asset rather than just how much you spent on installing it initially. So in the past, we had a snapshot of an asset. Now we have a more detailed understanding of the asset. So if we know that we're spending too much on any particular asset, we can. It's a tool that allows people to start thinking about whether there's a smarter way of doing work. So if something keeps breaking down all the time, we can then reassess our plan on whether we maintain it or continue maintaining it, or we do our upgrades.
So it's, just to put it in lay terms again, it's like a monitoring system for all the power infrastructure. It gives you much more detailed feedback on the state of all the components.
Yeah, it's a place for us to record our events and our breakdowns a lot better. There might not be real-time monitoring, because it's not possible to have sensors on every pole or every small transformer out in the field. New Zealand's a pretty remote area. You can't get Wi-Fi or 3G signals most places.
Sure. So, but this will still be a vast improvement over the existing one, I would imagine.
Absolutely.
So, what's your involvement in that, and how did you get involved in it?
Being the asset manager, my role is to make sure that assets are managed optimally. And part of like I mentioned, one of the biggest issues was we didn't know anything about the history of the asset. We only knew a snapshot as to when it was installed and what its age is. So this was kind of like that next step in trying to improve our understanding of our asset. And it's not just, we've got like 20,000 poles, 4,000 transformers. We've got a large number of assets, and it's very hard to keep track of each individual one on a spreadsheet or something like that.
Yeah.
So, like I mentioned, this is nothing new. It's stuff that's been used in the industry before, and we're looking at installing this to help us with our understanding a lot more.
Yeah. So how did you get involved in that? Like, did you push this? Was it like mandated? Was it?
Yes, so it's something that large utilities have had for a while.
Yeah.
And it was always on the cards that we need to start looking at.
And you mean by large utilities, you mean other utilities, not the one you're working at?
Other utilities, that's
right. Right, got you. Yeah.
So our utility is a pretty small utility.
Mm-hmm.
And there's let me put it this way: New Zealand's got 4 million people, and it's got 27 utilities. Australia's got 20 million people and much more land, and it's got 10 utilities. So New Zealand utilities tend to be very small, and therefore the work that they can do and the types of systems they can have tend to be very limited. Okay. So this sort of enterprise management system is usually used in very large utilities. But the idea was to be able to achieve what large utilities do, but for a very low cost, and in a very simple manner.
Yeah, I get. So how did you get involved again? How did you? Why are you involved?
Yeah, so I'm the asset manager. That's my role.
Yeah.
And because I'm responsible for the assets, and since we were considering, before I joined, we were considering at least getting some ideas from the larger utilities. When I started, I was given the responsibility to look into this in more details.
Okay, cool. And so, obviously being a pro-innovation sort of guy, you were willing to run with it and maybe push it to make it happen?
Yeah, so like I said, having an enterprise management system is fine. That's like stuff that utilities have been doing. What's the innovative stuff in there is we've linked it to tablets, which people in the field will take. So the idea is that if anyone ever does any bit of work on any of our assets, they have to go through a series of menus that record some basic information about that asset that then gets pushed into the asset management system that then lets us know about the condition of the asset and allows us to prioritize the replacement based on the information that we're getting. People who are, responding for other reasons. Somebody might go there to respond for a fault, a power outage. Somebody might go there to connect a new customer. Somebody might be just driving past and he notices something. So those sort of bits of getting information from our field staff is what's unique about what we do.
Okay. And do you get a sense of satisfaction from being involved in this project versus the sort of day-to-day running of your managerial duties?
Yeah, absolutely, because this project has a significant impact into the way the business is structured and hence the way the business is conducted. What it allows us to do is it allows us to automate a lot of the decision-making process, and it gets rid of any speculation in the organization, which means that our policies and standards are implemented all the way through the business by everyone. And we're talking about a large, blue-collar workforce that doesn't have the time to read through every policy and document and everything that we churn out. So this is a way of enforcing that.
Right. Cool. So this is quite challenging sometimes to bring new innovations into big organizations. Have you come across any obstacles to making this happen, or things that are slowing it down? And if so, how did you get through that to make sure things stay on track? Have you found that the organization itself is quite pro-innovation, or have you found that there's a bit of resistance there?
There was significant resistance. We really had to push the board to accept the direction we were taking, because it is $1 million project in its own right to restructure the business to then head in that direction, and that impacts the next 4 or 5 years of works that we do as well. So the board wasn't quite on. Well, it took a lot of convincing internally with the senior executives who were not necessarily part of the business, of the network business, but were part of the overall group. So we have a CFO that heads a lot of other businesses. We have a COO who's the Chief Operations Officer. Even though we are a network, we have other businesses within the organization, and these executives look after all businesses. So getting it past the C-suite was the difficult part, convincing the CE level executives. And their biggest cause of concern was that they felt it might not, that the benefits that other organizations had seen may not eventuate in our organization.
Mm-hmm.
But it was the benefits that other organizations had seen were more from field staff optimization, and we have our own field staff, so that's fine. The major benefit that we have is that we can actually convince the regulator that we need to invest more, and therefore we can get more revenue from the regulator rather than reduce cost. So it was about increasing revenues rather than reducing cost.
Yeah, cool. So without going into the details of the project itself, what did you do to push it forward? How did you get past some of that resistance to make it happen? Because clearly you believe that the benefits are there.
Yeah, so one of the biggest issues that the C-suite had was that they didn't think we had the ability to deliver it, and that was primarily because, like I said, we're a small utility, and in a small utility, people are generally more overloaded, so every engineer has to do the work of 3 other specialist engineers in other utilities. And being a regulated business, our workload is pretty much the same as a big utility. So I had to get external resources arranged, and by talking to people, tapping people on shoulders, I managed to get a pretty experienced nuclear scientist from Russia to start with us. And his sole job was to focus on the delivery of this project. And once the C-suite only managed to beat him after the board approved the project, but that was their biggest concern. And once the project started and they saw the caliber of the person that we managed to get on board, that kind of allayed a lot of their concerns immediately there and then on the spot, and therefore the running of the project is pretty smooth. But getting it past the board and the C-suite to get approved was the difficult part.
Yeah, and that's quite challenging, and that is quite entrepreneurial because you're bringing in resources. Like you basically brought in a James Bond villain from Russia to make it happen there.
Basically, yeah. he's quite a funny Russian. You don't get them. They're pretty rare.
So it involves a bit of creativity and thinking outside of, bringing in lateral thinking.
That's right, and not just that. It's also the vendors that you select to supply the software. Like, there's a lot of people that have, like, IBM supplied this, SAP supplied this, but we chose to go with this company called Maximo that was recently bought by ABB, and that's because we had...
all commercially sensitive information will be edited.
Okay, yeah. But the supplier that we chose was just happened to be getting into the market for a smaller industry as well. So they usually supply to larger players. And they were looking for a smaller partner because they had a new product that they were looking at selling to mid-sized businesses. So we just happened to be the first person to knock on their door through luck. And that led to a lot of synergies because they needed an example case. And so they gave us the solution and a lot of sort of like really experienced consultants for no cost because they wanted to get a business case up and running, and we managed to get a very powerful software for a system for what we needed to do. So that sort of gave us a very good that sort of negotiation resulted in a very good result for us.
Cool.
So it was the right software and the ability to execute. Those are the biggest concerns, and because we were in the right place at the right time and found the right people, that those two issues were addressed.
So that brings me on to the next question, which was, what's your biggest success moment in this project? Would you say that is, or do you have another example?
Biggest success moment? Well, yeah, I guess just getting it off the line was the biggest success because I knew that because my GM, he worked for IBM and he used to sell these. He was a consultant for these sort of softwares in the past, and so him and we knew that this was what the organization needed. We could see where all the operational problems were and what we needed to address. So getting it past the C-suite was the biggest challenge, and that was, once that went ahead, then everything's been going smoothly so far.
Cool. And on your this, I think this is the final question on your entrepreneurial project. How's your MBA helped you?
How's that?
If you try and imagine being involved in a similar project before the MBA with a utility, versus what you know now, having gone through an MBA, do you think it's helped you to tackle this challenge?
Yeah, so my biggest challenge was convincing the C-suite.
Mm-hmm.
And had I not done my MBA and I was trying to convince them, I would not have been able to understand things from their perspective. One of the biggest selling points for the software was that if we get this framework up and running in a way that that's reasonable, like we think it can be done, it means that if we have the opportunity to take over other utilities and be able to bring in significant operational efficiencies and expand the company that way,
mm-hmm.
because we have built this set of IP. That sort of sentiment resonated really strongly with the CEO, and on the back of that CEO went and bought another field service provider in the adjacent utility with the longer-term plan to start rolling this out to other utilities as well. And so it kind of gives the business new avenues to expand on stuff that it needs to do on a regular basis as well. So that I would never have thought of, opportunities like that had I not done my MBA.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, so that's basically the end of the half hour. So
Alright.
thanks very much, dude. And is there anything else that you want to talk about there? Oh, yeah? Is there anything else that you feel you want to cover? For example, has working on this entrepreneurial project made you more inclined to maybe think about your own entrepreneurial venture in the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's maybe not this project, but my role in general. We're looking at stuff such as the impact of trying to understand the impact of the network and predict how it will evolve in the future. And there is a lot of opportunity I see out there from, say, for example, electric cars or renewable energy. It's just about having the resources to be able to execute that. So, you know, I these are the sort of projects that I think that only a large corporate can do as long as they put their mind to it, and that'll benefit society as a whole. But I, can an individual do it? Maybe. Is there opportunity out there? Definitely. So yeah, I definitely think that I might be doing a more entrepreneurial role depending if I find the right organization in the future, but not necessarily an entrepreneurial role just because of the industry that I'm in.
Okay, fantastic. All right, thank you very much. That
No
is the
worries.
end of the interview.